Good morning. My name is Elisa Navarro from Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, one of the accelerator managers in Green Cities Climate Accelerator, together with INGENIERIA Vienna. The IT Climate Kit is our main supporter and sponsors in this accelerator. I would like to thanks to all the partners here, thanks to our startups, the startups that attended this event today in Madrid, the startups that have not been able to come to Madrid today, investors, public institutions, corporates, and our colleagues from INGENIERIA Vienna, Alexis, Patrick, Alex, thank you. And especially to our partners, the Spanish partners are here with us, and the Viennese and German partners through streaming online. Hello, thank you, good morning, partners, and last but not least, our team at UPM, thanks to ITV, thanks to Aristides, Anna, Genesis, and all the marvelous team that are running this accelerator. If you check the agenda, we have an intense day today, so let's continue with our keynote speaker. If I have to say something about our speaker, is that the first level speaker in sustainability and climate change all over the world. She is María Mendiluce. María is living right now in Switzerland, so this is the reason because we have to connect with her online. María, hello, good morning, and welcome. It's a pleasure, it's a real pleasure to be here with us. Let me check your long video because I have here some information about you. María is she's the CEO of the Women Business Coalition and has 25 years of experience in sustainable development, energy, and climate action. So it's perfect for this keynote speaker. She has also held senior position at the Economic Bureau of the Spanish Prime Minister, in the CEO's office of Iberdrola, and at the International Energy Agency. María has a PhD in energy economics. She's a commissioner on the Energy Transition Commission, a co-chair of the Global Environment Outlook Business Advisory Board, and she is board member of the Center for International Environment Studies in Geneva. María was awarded in the Spanish Climate Personality of the Year in 2021 by the Climate Reality Project in Spain as part of the third edition of their Climate Leaders Awards. So María, thanks again, and the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk to you today about why we have to go all in for 2030, and you will know why I mean this. I'm showing my screen, apologies to the first one. So, and I'm going to tell you what is the corporate climate journey and what is the role that you could have in that journey. So my presentation is going to be quite simple. It's going to talk to you about why climate is important and why we must accelerate action in the next decade. Then I'm going to talk to you about what we have to do, when we have to do that, how, and that's the most important, I have to say. And when I talk about the where, I have tried to put myself in your shoes. Think, okay, so where could these people that are going to be listening to me take action and contribute with their sharp minds and very intelligent brains? So, as you know, well, climate is everywhere. Whether it's because we are experiencing extreme events, people are protesting in the streets, there are floods, and every year seems to be the hottest year. Climate change is impacting in unusual places. So I'm from Pamplona, and yesterday I spoke to my sister who has her basement flooded. So washing machine, everything needs to be thrown away. And it's happening more and more often. And this time also I have a friend that works in a factory also have the full factory floated as well. And I'm afraid that this is going to be happening more often, and we will have to also adapt to climate change. But the most important is that we do everything we can to stop it. Policymakers, governments know it, and they're coming up with very aggressive emission reduction plans. So here, Biden is signing orders on climate change. As you know, the US agreed to cut their emissions by half in the next 8 years, in the same way that the European Union did it with the EU Fit 55. And it's not only policymakers, we have investors and the finance sector that are coming in masses as well. They came to Glasgow and they're talking to the companies that they finance and invest in, and they say, listen, companies, you need to reduce your carbon footprint because it is a stranded cost for me, for my company and for my investment. And Larry Fink every year sends a letter to the CEOs and is saying sustainability is the new standard. And Blackrock invests in so many companies, and when they do so, they're asking those companies to reduce their footprint, to present their climate action plans, to commit to net zero. Even in the courts, we saw recently that Shell was told that they need to have a plan to show how they're going to align with the Paris Agreement. And this was quite historical, and we will see more and more of these court orders against some of the most pollutant companies in the world. So companies are under increasing pressure to reduce their emissions, whether it's from investors, from regulators, whether it's from activists in the street, their employees, or the customers. And they have this pressure to do everything they can to reduce their emissions and to be aligned with what the science is telling that a company like theirs needs to do to cut emissions. So I think the why is very clear, and it is good for business. It is what clients are asking, investors are asking. So there's no one to hide. This is what companies need to do. So what can they do? So basically, to address climate change, we need to change 6 systems. The first one is the energy system that needs to be electrified with renewable energies, maybe with some nuclear while we have it. We need not only renewable energy, we also need energy storage. We need the interconnections. We need a well-functioning grid. So in fact, in the energy sector, what we're going to see is that we're going to move from a system that is based on variable cost, a system that has many more fixed costs, which is good because we will have more certainty about energy prices. But there needs to be massive investments in the grid. We need to electrify transport and other energy uses, and the revolution is there. As you know, thanks to Tesla, now all the big manufacturers have plans to fully electrify their fleets. And as I often say, I think no one will be talking about internal combustion engines in the 30s, that it is game over. We need to change the way that we produce materials, whether it's steel, cement, chemicals, aluminum, and we can do so. We are part at Women Business of an initiative. It's called Mission Possible Partnership that is explaining that actually it's possible to decarbonize the so-called hard-to-abate sectors. Now, the hardest to abate sector, believe it or not, is agriculture and nature and land use. There's not that much pressure on the sector yet, and there are not that many solutions. And they require solutions that are very fragmented and need massive change in the way that we produce and use land, and also in our diets. And so while it will take a little bit of time, I can assure you that in 2-3 years, we will be only talking about this. And finally, the finance sector. Again, they're coming late to the party, but they're coming fast to the space. And in Glasgow, there was an alliance that was presented, and they say that they have $130 trillion to invest in this transition, with many banks looking at their investments and portfolios and looking at their carbon footprint and understanding their risks and understanding the potential to change those companies. So the what, we know it's quite clear. There is so many reports that talk about what needs to happen. So we know a lot about where the emissions are happening. We know a lot about the different scenarios. Here I have put the case of steel, but we have it for all the sectors, whether it's the International Energy Agency, the Mission Possible Partnership, and the many think tanks that are working on this space. We have a very clear picture on what needs to happen, what technologies are needed, and how fast we need to reduce emissions in those sectors to get to net zero. So an important element is that we know that the technology will transform over time. What happens is that if we leave it to normal functioning of the world, we might transform by 2200 or something like that. And we don't have time. According to the climate law, we absolutely need to have emissions every decade. So as you can see, from 2020 to 2030 is the toughest part, is where we need to massively reduce the emissions from the more or less 54 gigatons of CO2 equivalent that we had in 2020 to around 27. So that is 27 gigatons that need to be removed that need not to go to the atmosphere. And that's, as you know, climate change is about emissions going to the atmosphere, but it's a cumulative problem. So we need to close the number of emissions going to the atmosphere, but we also need to remove emissions that are currently in the atmosphere. And then when we look at the picture of how emissions are growing in different countries, then the picture is not that great, right? Because on one hand, you hear companies, governments all committing to go to net zero to reduce emissions, and then emissions continue to grow. And so we need to think about how to accelerate the change in trend. And while you can see that after COVID, during COVID, emissions reduced quite substantially, they have picked up in the last year, and that's quite worrying. So the key issue that we need to address is how are we going to reduce emissions? How are we going to, how much we're going to reduce, and how fast we're going to be able to reduce those emissions. And as you know, because I think many of you are engineers in the room, so technologies follow this cycle that start with a concept, then we develop a solution, then we can activate that solution in a niche market. This is still not very competitive, and the share of sales are really small. And the critical point is, when can we reach that market tipping point, when that solution comes to the mass market and goes through exponential growth before then moving into the maturity space. So the critical part of that how do we accelerate this S-curve so that those emissions become competitive and adopted massively by the market. So Systemic, which is a fantastic think tank, and I welcome you to take a look at the reports, did this one on the Paris effect, and they show the development of the different technologies in the different sectors and their maturity, and how the possible future that they offer. And so, as you can see, we envision that there is potential technologies that can be in the market, fully in the market, not even in the mass market, but fully quite soon. For the electricity, is already on now. We can see it. Renewables are competitive. They are on an exponential curve, and they will soon join what is called the late market. Even aviation, we know that by the 2040s, there will be some technologies that will be able to bring us to net zero, or low carbon solutions. So the technologies exist, and we know the cycle. And now the critical element is, how do we get to that tipping point. There are some good examples that history have shown about technologies that have gone through this S-curve to fast adoption. And as you can see, what is the telephone, the credit card, microwave, video games, cell phone, digital cameras. They all offered something that we didn't have, that the client didn't have. So I want that thought to stick in your mind. As you're thinking about solutions, you need to think about solutions that will address a need that has not been fulfilled yet, so that it can get to broad adoption. When we look at solar and other renewable energies, we can see as well that the market tends to be quite pessimistic on the potential of these technologies when they are in the low part of the S-curve. And so the World Energy Outlook, which is the flagship report from the International Energy Agency, produces every year a forecast for the development of solar energy. And as you can see in those, the market has always outperformed the forecast. Okay, so there are technologies that are joining the S-curve, whether it's renewables, whether it's electric vehicle, that will move into fast adoption in the short term. But we still need many technologies to come to this point. So now I'm going to talk to you about what we do at Women Business, the organization that I lead, and how we're trying to activate what we call the different loops, ambition loop, action loop, so that we get to that point, that tipping point faster. Because we know that one company alone cannot do it, that we need many companies to adopt these approaches. And because we know that not only we need companies, we need the investors, we need their clients, and we need the regulator to put in place changes that will accelerate the development of these technologies so that they reach the maturity that is needed for mass adoption. So what we do with businesses is that we have developed a series of initiatives to convince them to be more ambitious on climate, because we believe that when business are more ambitious, and they are, because yesterday I was talking to one CEO and he was referring to a conversation he had with the European policymakers that were saying, before policymakers could hide behind the companies because they were saying, no, companies don't want this change. But now companies are changing and governments are a bit slow. And so they realize that actually they need to go fast because companies are asking them to go fast in these changes. So more business ambition and action leads to greater policy ambition, which indeed leads to more action because those policies are going to make more actors activate their actions and activities. Then once we are in this positive ambition loop, then the action loop comes into play. And the action loop, it is, let me explain it. And this is what we're trying to do. We want to design interventions that combined can accelerate the decarbonization of these sectors. So on one hand, you have the sector that will do their innovation. They have their action plans. This is the BASF, the ArcelorMittal, the big companies or smaller companies say, yeah, no, I'm committing to net zero, but I can do it fast enough because my client doesn't want this product, because the regulation doesn't allow me, or I don't have finance, okay? So then we create demand clubs. So we provide demand signals. We go to the companies that are going to purchase steel, like the cars, okay, car manufacturers. And we tell them, okay, why don't you create a demand club and demand low carbon steel to ArcelorMittal? Because if you tell them that you're going to buy these amounts of tons of zero carbon steel by 2030, they can invest in the new factories and the new technologies that will bring that product to you. And they will do that much faster than if you let the market evolve. Then we talk to policymakers and we say, okay, Well, these are the technology. You saw the different roadmaps for steel and other products. So we talk to them and say, okay, well, if there were these changes in the regulation, there will be some of these higher emitting steel will not be allowed, and that will bring the space for low carbon solutions to come to the market. And finally, we speak to investors, and there are some interesting initiatives like CA100 that talks to investors and creates a dialogue between investors and companies, and investors are talking to the companies, to ArcelorMittal, and telling them, oh, ArcelorMittal, Aditya is, I think, the CEO. You absolutely need to accelerate your emission reductions, because if not, I'm not going to invest in your company. And I'm very happy to finance the transition. And that, as I finance that transition, that's also a good business for me, because I can be part of that change, and your company is going to have a higher valuation, and I'm going to benefit from that. Okay. So, that's our theory of change. These are the levers that we're trying to activate. These are the levers that you, when you're developing your solutions, you need to take into account. And what we do is we bring business together behind what we call the Women Business Leadership Framework that has the 4 A's. The first one is that we bring companies to commit to be net zero. So the first time is is ArcelorMittal has committed, or Cemex committed to be net zero by 2050. And we do so through initiatives that are independent and that are rigorous and based on science, like the Science Based Targets Initiative, the Business Ambition, the SME Climate Hub for small companies. Once those companies, and we have around 2,000 companies have committed to set science-based targets. 1,000 companies have committed to be aligned with 1.5, which is the most difficult one. And we have 3,000 SMEs that have committed to be net zero with the SME Climate Hub. So all in all, there are 5,000 companies around the world that say, yeah, that they are leaders, and they'll say, yes, we can do this. They have the confidence that they can do it. Now, we need to mainstream that. We need to have many more companies that commit to be net zero, because we know that when companies commit to something, then they put it into their company incentives, and then they have every single incentive to achieve those targets, and often they outperform the targets. So it is all about starting to measure. It's about setting targets and then reporting progress, and then we have the wheel that's spinning positively. Then we look at action. I talked to you before about the need to create a demand-side initiatives. So we have a few of them. We have RE100, companies committed to 100% renewables, EV100, 100% electric vehicles, Steel Zero, committing to buy an amount of zero-emission steel, and Concrete Zero going in the same direction. So these are initiatives where we bring together the potential clients for those solutions and create that strong demand signal. But there are other things that we can do around supply chain transformation, etc. Because I'm not sure if you're aware, but companies, they have to reduce their emissions in their own operations, in the factories, in the electricity that they consume. And that's easy because they can shift to renewable energy or put solar panels. It's really feasible. But the most difficult for companies is to reduce their emissions in their value chain. This represents between 50 and 95% of their emissions. It's called Scope 3 emissions. And so there are many new initiatives that are needed to help decarbonize those supply chains. Then the third element is around advocacy. This is about how business interact with policymakers, how they make their voice heard, that a more ambitious policy plan is needed, and that business are ready to step up their game. It is about engaging with trade associations that often have been more conservative to convince their peers to support ambitious policies. It is about also being much more concrete on telling policymakers what are the regulatory changes that are needed for technologies to scale up. And finally, accountability. If you saw the news in Glasgow, So inside the blue zone, which is where negotiations take place, everything was really positive, many announcements, and whether it was governments, business, the investors, incredible ambition that was emerging. But then in the streets, Red and company were complaining that, we were seeing that the emissions were increasing, as I saw you on the graph, and that there was too much blah, 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 and not enough action. Right? So we think that to rebuild trust, accountability is really important, and companies need to develop transition action plans. They need to report periodically progress. They need to explain what is working, what is not working, lessons learned, etc. So I have talked to you about the why, the what, the when, which is absolutely by 2030. The how, which is, in my view, the most difficult. And now I just want to talk to you about the where. Where can you make change? And through your innovations, the new business models that you're creating, technologies, etc. Where can you do? And obviously, there's so many space for you to have an impact. You have all the 5 systems that I mentioned before, where massive technology development is needed. But my advice to you as you're developing these solutions is that you create solutions that are simple, that can be replicable, that are like the smartphone or others, fulfilling a need that people, companies have, and doing that with 0 emissions, and that you work very closely with the small companies, because those are the ones that they need to massively change. If you're part of a big company, then of course you will be part of the technology development there. But we need to transform the full society, a large amount of businesses that do not have the means and the innovation that is needed. So I do think that there is a massive economic opportunity to help support those SMEs. We launched a year ago the SME Climate Hub. It is a platform for SMEs to take action. We're providing tools, capacity, etc. Well, think about how you can help the transformation of those SMEs, because I believe that the future is going to be decentralized. I believe that the solutions are going to be local, as you know, with renewables, electric vehicles, and others. And so we need those innovations and technologies and advance them through the technology cycle that I presented before. So at the end, after I finish my presentations with this slide, so you do have, you have choices in the way that you work and the way that you live and the way that you think as well. No? And and I think it all depends on you, which road you're going to take. There is the easy road, there is the difficult road. But like always, when it's challenging and difficult, that's when it's more fulfilling and when we learn more. So I hope you take the difficult road to net zero and you help us with your innovation and your talent to get there sooner than what the models are telling us that we will get there. So thank you very much, and over to you.